My whole objective for this trip, being the fact that I was going to be solo for the whole thing, was to avoid problems. If I could avoid something by fitting a part to it now, or make life easier when it did go wrong, then I did that. A really good example of that is everybody will complain about the fuel pump and these bikes being susceptible to bad fuel. Well, once I didn't have any problems, I certainly didn't have any breakages, and the fuel pump in there has gotten me from beginning to end. What I did to protect against any fuel pump issues was put in a series of pre-filters, both before the fuel pump and actually after the fuel pump, to prevent issues with the injectors themselves, and I changed these quite regularly. Really good resource for that is a company called Profil in Tasmania that modify the pre-filter at the bottom end of the fuel pump to a gauze type filter, which has been my saviour throughout this whole journey. Yes, I've changed it a lot, but just by seeing the thing, when you pull the old thing out, you can see it traps a lot of the dirt before it gets to the fuel pump. There's a micro filter after the fuel pump as well to protect down to 10 microns of any stuff to get through the injector, so I never had any injector issues. I could tell when the pre-filters were starting to get cloggy or dirty as well, simply by how the bike started in the morning. It's quite interesting. Once it was up to temperature and running, it was fine, but certainly when the fuel filters were starting to clog, starting in the morning would take maybe 2 or 3 turns of the starter as opposed to just one as normal. So that was a really important point to the modification process. Other stuff that has been proven to break is the standard frame bolts on the subframe and the tank. Replace those with Royal Raid stuff, like everybody does. A lot of complaints to the bike about rocker arms, rocker arm bearings, and so on. And bits and pieces of the internals of the engine which suffer some fatigue failures. Well, I haven't had problems, touch wood. We'll soon see when we strip the bike down, but it's done 33,500 kilometres without any serious failing. And all of that, I think, comes down to good oil and changing the oil regularly. Probably change the oil about every 3,000 kilometres for the best quality oil I could get, which was generally Motul 7100, 10 weight 60. The wheels, swap standard wheels, possibly not safe for a one-off build by Woody's Wheel Works in the States. Recommended by quite a lot of people. One of them is Lyndon Poskett, as some of you might know. A lot of Dakar riders use Woody Wheel Works, basically using XL or A60 rims, double-laced, stronger spokes, rad hubs with heavy-duty bearings. Never had a problem on wheels of any sort, and we went through some seriously rough terrain and some really rocky places, and a lot of corrugations. Never had a single problem with wheels, spokes, balancing, anything. Carried a spare set of bearings with me, never needed them. In terms of on the wheels, tyres and stuff, how many punches did I have? 2. Both punches by nails, which couldn't be avoided. Never had a pinch flat. Never had any other form of flat, and I did run low pressures, certainly in the desert sections in Australia, down as low as 12 psi, and no rim locks, by the way. No rim locks, no punches. I did run throughout, though, heavy-duty, Michelin heavy-duty, ultra-heavy-duty tubes, both front and rear, throughout, and repaired them after we had the 2 nail punches, so they worked really well. Did service the bike to death during it. We had 4 major services, 2 in Australia, 2 in South America, some minor services, and as I said, a lot of oil changes, so that probably kept the bike going quite well also. What's it done then to achieve that? Well, we've done, as I said, 33,500 kilometres, of which 850 or so of that was before we left the UK, so not the majority of it obviously being away, and over every terrain you could possibly imagine. As you can see on the website, we did a little bit of everything, and a little bit of tarmac as well. In terms of the servicing, as I said, serviced the bike pretty heavily in Perth after it had a real ranging through the Simpson and Gibson deserts. Serviced it again when I got to Sydney after a lot of road miles in advance of going to South America. And then we did 2 major services in Lima and Santiago, both KTM dealers. More for prevention. There was no real cure of any major issues other than in Perth. Come back to that one in a minute. but the others were more for prevention and just basic servicing and things that I knew needed replaced. For instance, the fuel pump filters. Other minor bits and pieces worth knowing. Since the bike came back, again, had no issues. It's never not failed to start. In fact, I keep saying to everybody, it's never had a breakdown. The only issues we've had a few issues, but they're all relatively minor in the bigger scheme of things. One, didn't have a lot of time to test the bike before heading off. So in the shakedown, which was unfortunately in the Australian desert, we suffered a couple of fuel leaks. Again, didn't stop the bike. We had to stop to tighten some stuff up on some of the additional fuel lines that had been put in because of the additional tank. So a couple of fuel leaks, no big deal. The only failure on the bike, I guess, and the failure in terms of the Riley Raid products is this rear rack, which suffered a fatigue failure just behind the fixings of the rear bolts, and that was some considerable time, and it was starting to go in northern Peru and eventually went in Chile somewhere. So I ended up trying to fix some metal weld, that didn't work, snapped again, so we ended up paracording it to keep it together. That was a real pain in the neck. I'm not sure if that was due to the Riley Raid rack itself. I think it's more likely to have been due to another piece of shit design, which is the RNG tail tidy, which I would never recommend to anybody on this bike for this type of work. Again, you come back to that, but basically the Riley Raid rack and the RNG tail tidy just don't work together. The spacers and the lights don't give this enough support to stop it from vibration, and therefore you suffer fatigue failure. So that failed. Not the end of the world, but that failed. As I said, the tail tidy itself, as you can see, it's the angle of the plate itself is too angled down close to the rear wheel, so immediately I cracked one plate, 2, 3, 4, 5 plates before I eventually gave up and just fitted a very, very small, totally illegal mini plate to get me to the end of the trip. So that was a problem. Indicator lights failed, lenses fell out, and eventually the rear brake track failed as well. It's just totally rubbish, so definitely wouldn't recommend that, and I'm going to go back to the standard tail tidy during the rebuild. Side stand, bane of my life. Side stand, standard side stand on these bikes is too long, fundamentally too long. One, when the bike's unloaded, got standard length legs like me, it's difficult to get up when if you use the stand to get on and off the bike. Personally, I don't when it's unloaded, but some people do. But more importantly, when the bike is loaded and the suspension compresses substantially, the side stand is just too long, and the bike stands virtually upright, which is just dangerous to that amount of load of the bike. And not only that, but it's impossible to put down and get up when you're on the bike. You know, when the bike's fully loaded, you have to use the side stand to get on and off the bike, and it's impossible to get on and off with that thing. So what did I do? Eventually, in Perth, we had 25mm cut off bottom side stand, and it worked much better after that. Only problem being some nutcase reversed into Katie in Chile and snapped it. Snapped the side stand, completely demolished the thing, and we ended up having a botched repair, which plagued me for the rest of the trip. But enough of that, it's on the website. The other thing that's a bit of a problem on these bikes, in my opinion, Riley Raid tanks, bottom corner of these tanks is really vulnerable to any damage, especially if you come down in tarmac and in rocky terrain. Whatever happens, even with the bike loaded, you end up bottoming this corner of the tank, and I have got some damage there, and that's why in Australia sourced these carbon guards and fitted carbon guards on them to try and give this a little bit of crash protection.